It's a 2-hour train trip northeast of London, through rolling green pastures to the English country town of Beccles. This quiet little community doesn't toss up a lot of news. The locals still talk of media megastar Sir David Frost, who moved here as a boy more than half a century ago. But now Beccles is in the spotlight, thanks to a blow-in from down under by the name of Julian Assange. When we arrived, he was completing for him the mundane daily task of signing in at the local police station.
How many days is this, Julian? 268, yeah.
For the best part of a year, the man synonymous with the explosive website WikiLeaks has cut a remote, forlorn figure on the daily drive to a supporter's country mansion where he's patiently awaited the court's ruling. Julian Assange has been fighting extradition to Sweden, where he's accused of molesting 2 women.
I felt that I was basically turning into Howard Hughes, that I had a very small circle of people here, a long way away from London, in rural England, and that those few people could be trusted.
Continue to protest my innocence.
Now there's a ruling by the High Court in London that Assange, dubbed the most dangerous man in the world, is to be surrendered to Sweden. Another appeal against extradition seems a formality.
Once Julian is in custody in Sweden to face domestic prosecution under Swedish law, there is a provision in the US-Sweden treaty which allows for a defendant either facing prosecution or someone who has been prosecuted and serving a sentence to be lent to the US for prosecution.
Sweden has been guilty of extraditing a number of individuals by, in fact, handing them over without proper process to the CIA, and they've been tortured down the line, and there have been findings against Sweden in human rights courts. And, of course, extradition is partly a political decision, and with an extremely right-wing Swedish government that owes a lot to America, you have a situation where he'd be more vulnerable than if, for example, he were returned to his own country, namely Australia.
It seems like only yesterday that we first reported on the organisation threatening to change the future of information and journalism. WikiLeaks was pumping out secret after big secret, and the people behind it forecast a new global transparency.
For everyone else, there's WikiLeaks.
As a people's intelligence agency, it opened the door on a hidden world. An electronic Dropbox for whistleblowers whose identities would remain secret and their secrets made public. From number 10 Downing Street to the Defence Department to MI5, corrupt governments in Africa and multinationals dumping toxic chemicals in third world countries. All were fair game. So too were some of the most secretive and sensitive corners of government in the United States, and the reaction there was intense. Some very powerful figures wanted Assange dead. Presidential hopeful Sarah Palin demanded he be hunted down like the Taliban. Other political heavyweights joined the chorus.
Julian Assange is engaged in warfare. Information terrorism, which leads to people getting killed, is terrorism. And Julian Assange is engaged in terrorism. He should be treated as an enemy combatant.
He's done enormous damage to our country. I think the man is a high-tech terrorist.
I would argue that it's closer to being a high-tech terrorist.
It's a pretty big deal, right? If Joseph Biden says that you're a high-tech terrorist and Sarah Palin says that you should be hunted down like Osama bin Laden, etc. And others say that you should be garroted in your hotel room and a car bomb would take care of the issue and so on. And threats against even my children. But What you do is you just take appropriate precautions.
The Swedish laws are pretty harsh when it comes to what he's been accused of, and I think WikiLeaks will limp on for a while. I doubt they're going to get any major new revelations given to them, and it will probably just be in a holding pattern until such time as Julian is released from prison.
The Julian Assange we profiled a year or so ago is isolated and without many of his closest, most trusted allies. And his truth machine, WikiLeaks, has serious problems. We've tracked down key figures in the launch and spectacular flight of WikiLeaks and the ascendancy of Julian Assange, and we found broken relationships, bitter feuds, and the future of the website under a very dark cloud.
There is no problem in hundreds of relationships that this organisation has, signed partnerships with media organisations on every continent except Antarctica. None of those have failed. They are all strong. They have all produced tremendous work.
How close a relationship did you have with him?
Do you mean if we kissed or something like that? We were just friends. But I mothered him. I was this close.
Brigitta Jonsdttir is an Icelandic MP, a campaigner for human rights and open government. She was one of Assange's closest friends. Now it's over. Things got heated when she advised him to stand aside as the WikiLeaks spokesperson, while the sexual molestation allegations played out.
Yeah, it was just one of these times where you sort of felt that maybe I should have shut up, because there was a lot of anger, you know.
Like what?
Well, you know, what sort of started to happen throughout this entire process was that there were many threats. It actually did feel a bit, abusive to work in this environment where people were objectified and only thought kindly of if they were useful.
What way was he abusive towards you?
Just, by threatening you,
In what way?
I can't go into details about that.
Why not?
Jonsdttir and Assange once had grand plans to make Iceland a media haven for free speech. Now, they don't even speak.
Anyone can say whatever they like, but Brigitta Jonsdttir, although she did valuable work, and I would never detract from the valuable work that she did, what she thinks is actually not relevant to the organisation. Having been excluded from the organisation, she had certain animosity towards it and towards me.
Julian is a very brilliant person. He's very intelligent, and on the other hand, I think he lacks some social competence.
The carrying out of a bombing where civilians have died.
Once a part of an unbreakable WikiLeaks double act, Daniel Domscheit-Berg played the computer nerd. Julian Assange, the charismatic leader.
So when we were putting this together, Daniel and I, earlier today...
But here again, a close relationship has turned noxious. For Assange, it founded on trust.
He'd been excluded from all source material. It was viewed that he was not trustworthy. We had concerns about his stability back in January 2010, and as a result, he was phased out of the high security part of what we were doing.
Domscheit-Berg believes Assange, the cyber warrior, developed an overinflated ego from the glut of global attention. And then he turned on his own.
He threatened me that he would hunt me down and kill me if I ever fucked up. And the fucking up part was related to endangering any of our sources. And actually that statement came completely out of the blue, because there was no mistake that had happened at that point in time. He became very paranoid about the way he was dealing with me, dealing with others as well. It was all about conspiracies, backstabbing, alleged conspiracies. And that's just tiresome if you want to work together.
Now in Berlin building his own whistleblower site, Domscheit-Berg has someone WikiLeaks and Assange badly need. The brains behind the intricate and protective WikiLeaks anonymous Dropbox. He's one of the few in this very public saga who's kept a lid on his identity. In the Wiki fraternity, he is simply called the Architect.
It's all his creation. Not a single line of code ever was made by Julian. He has no role in creating this submission system, and neither have I. And neither did I or he ever have access to that system. That person who created it decided to not provide such a powerful tool to WikiLeaks anymore, and he decided to take it away.
What can you tell us about the Architect?
Nothing.
Why is that?
He wants to remain anonymous, so I have nothing to say about him.
How can someone remain anonymous in such a transparent area?
If you want to protect the people that want to be only working on the content, not the politics, you should absolutely honor that.
How important is the role of the Architect?
It's very.
In what way?
He's a genius. He's a genius in, writing the stuff that you need to write, the coding, the encryptions, to make sure that people can leak documents without being tracked.
The super security of the Wiki website, designed and delivered by the Architect, drew an avalanche of super-sensitive material. But after dalliances with self-publication, Assange's strategy shifted into alliances with some of the world's biggest and most respected newspapers. It would not be long before these relationships would also disintegrate. The Guardian's a bastion of British journalism. Along with the New York Times, Le Monde and Spain's El País, it published sensational reports courtesy of classified information provided by WikiLeaks. The relationship with the New York Times has been difficult for some months, but with the Guardian, it turned toxic. WikiLeaks and the Guardian had collaborated on a number of big releases, and they were invariably fraught with shifting terms and conditions. But it was a treasure trove of documents dubbed Cablegate, a cache of 251,000 classified State Department files that would bring the biggest arguments, accusations and recriminations.
Things were getting tense between us because Julian was at this point sort of semi-detached. Communication was very difficult because I think he felt more and more paranoid about his own personal position after the accusations in Sweden. So it wasn't a sort of simple matter of just listening, lifting the phone and speaking to him. You had to go through encrypted technologies.
Assange wasn't simply worried about how the Guardian communicated with him. He was deeply concerned about how the paper's computers were vulnerable to hackers.
They put all the cables onto internet-connected computer systems, completely breaching their security, opening them up to foreign intelligence agencies and computer hackers. The first thing we would have known is when our people in the United States would have been rounded up and arrested.
The Cablegate files spilled the beans on everything from the State Department spying on the United Nations to calls by Saudi Arabia for the US to bomb Iran. It was hot stuff, and certainly one of WikiLeaks' biggest scoops. But Assange accused The Guardian of double dealing.
They secretly gave all the cables to the New York Times behind our backs. They secretly set up a program to publish them without telling us.
We had a sort of crisis meeting, or a clear the air meeting, where Julian suddenly barged into this building unannounced with lawyers. And he got very angry with us because he accused us of dealing with the New York Times where he didn't want to. And the reason he didn't want to deal with the New York Times was because the New York Times had published an unflattering piece about him. So it was all getting very messy, and we had a meeting that went on for about 8 hours. There was lots of jabbing of fingers and shouting and accusations.
How free is information? How well protected are whistleblowers?
It wasn't just the so-called hit piece that upset Assange. He was angry that the New York Times failed to carry some of the reports on America's illicit activities.
Whether we are being given the truth.
The New York Times had been censoring its material, attacking an alleged source, and attacking us as an organisation for its own strategic purposes.
WikiLeaks' alliance with the old media was on the rocks, but the fallout from Cablegate wouldn't end there. More damage was on the way, courtesy of a WikiLeaks underling by the name of Herbert Snorreson. Wide-eyed and enthusiastic when he joined, Snorreson soon found himself in the bitter crossfire between Assange and Domscheit-Berg.
The most specific disagreement I had with Julian was that he alleged that Daniel acted maliciously and that Daniel was after Julian's job. I requested evidence because I was skeptical of the claim.
Can you tell me the language that he used when he spoke to you?
Yeah, there is a quote that circulated quite widely. I am the heart and soul of this organization, its founder, philosopher, original coder. I really don't remember the entire list. And ending with, if you have a problem with me, you can piss off.
I think I told him very soundly to piss off. That we were trying to get on with things, and it wasn't useful to have an Icelandic student hectoring the CEO of an organization during a time of high stress.
My immediate reply was, so be it. I left and I have not spoken with Julian since.
It might have paid Assange to treat Snorreson better. On a flight home to Iceland, he read a book written by two Guardian reporters Assange had teamed up with to produce the Cablegate stories. Incredibly, there in black and white, they'd printed a password, confidentially given to them by Assange to open the encrypted Cablegate files. The files have been placed on the internet for safekeeping in case anything happened to Assange.
My immediate reaction when I noticed the password was, holy crap, this isn't happening.
Snorreson drove to his grandparents' home close to Reykjavik airport. If the password opened the cables, all the names of US informants would be revealed. Snorreson fired up his computer and carefully typed in the code. Seconds later, the Cablegate internet file opened up.
I immediately realized that this would be something that was very dangerous. My main concern was that the release of those documents could put people's lives at risk.
Snorreson contacted his friend Domscheit-Berg in Germany to tell him what he'd found.
Sharing the password for the master copy was, I think, a big mistake, and there's not really any excuse for that other than being lazy.
Not far from central Berlin, Der Freitag, a radical newspaper with a tiny circulation, splashed the story. We can now reveal the principal source was none other than Daniel Domscheit-Berg.
Well, what do you say to the argument that by talking to Freitag, by pointing him in the direction of the file and the password, the key, that you made it likely that that information would be available, unredacted around the world?
It's just a matter of time until somebody intelligent would have put one and one together. And anyone putting in resources into finding these cables because they have an interest in obtaining access to the cables probably has known that for quite some time already.
But you helped speed it up?
No, I don't. Well, I don't know. You could allege that I did. I don't know if I did.
That the code printed in the Guardian book was a grave error of judgment by the authors mattered not a jot. WikiLeaks looked as though its security was slack. For Daniel Domscheit-Berg, it vindicated his stand against WikiLeaks.
It is important for the world to understand the general issue at hand, because people are potentially risking their lives trusting in the ability to handle information properly. We were not just making this up in order to find an excuse for sabotaging WikiLeaks or for spreading dirt, you know.
I assume it was probably not malicious, the putting of the password in the book. It was just extremely arrogant and careless. Where there may be genuine criticism levelled at me and the decision-making of the organisation is that actually we trusted the Guardian.
With the names of spies and informants revealed, Assange decided to publish the full cables on the WikiLeaks website, arguing that everyone should have access and not those simply in the know, such as corrupt dictatorships and their intelligence organisations.
Given that the material has already been published, at that stage we determined that, well, actually we have to give this to the public, we have to give this to the journalists, we have to give this to the human rights workers.
WikiLeaks polarises opinion. It's either a force for good or a dangerous enemy of the state. Whatever the case, with the architect gone, it's now effectively closed for new business, unable to take whistleblowers' electronic submissions.
When will it be online again?
Sometime. I don't know.
When will it be open to take submissions again? Electronic submissions?
I'm not sure. So we're in the...
Will it be 1 month, 2 months, 6 months?
I imagine before the end of the year.
But right now, Assange has other, more important concerns. Most pressing, an appeal against the High Court's decision to extradite him to Sweden. At the same time, a US grand jury is investigating if there's sufficient evidence to indict him on charges of spying against the United States.
Under the US Espionage Act, there are sections that do carry the death penalty. For that reason, I suspect he wouldn't be extradited on those charges, but there are lesser charges that carry up to 10 years imprisonment, and that is what he would face, 10 years in a maximum security prison.
No matter what the outcome in the United States, Julian Assange can expect little help from Australia.
We had the Australian Prime Minister come out and accuse him of illegal conduct, which was manifestly untrue and was proven as such by an Australian Federal Police investigation in Australia. So her comments were both prejudicial and premature. We also had the Attorney General, Robert McClelland, suggesting that they may cancel Julian's passport. Now, as an Australian living abroad myself, I found that to be a shocking statement to come from our government, that the Australian government would be so quick to accuse rather than protect an Australian living abroad.
Well, the Prime Minister and the Attorney General are US lackeys. I mean, it's as simple as that.
I really admire the man. I mean, he's getting a huge amount of flack from all sides, but he's actually, by releasing all this information, he's created a complete hellhole for his life. He didn't have to do it, and yet what he's done is just remarkable.
Julian Assange set out to challenge the media and government secrecy. WikiLeaks has given a penetrating insight into the covert world of war and politics. Now he and his organisation face their severest test, the struggle for survival.